This following story takes place back in the summer of 2010. On this night, my sister-in-law asked me if I had ever messed with Ouija boards before. My perplexed face said everything. I never even heard of this thing before. Seeing this, my sister-in-law began explaining what they were, how they worked, and then asked if I wanted to experience the board for myself. I agreed, and since her parents wouldn't let us do it in their house, my brother, sister-in-law, and I headed to our parents' place to set up the board on the porch. It should be noted that there was a group of us in this session. After setting up, we began our session with Brittany, my sister-in-law, asking if there were any friendly spirits around us that were willing to communicate. The board moved to no, at which point I felt myself already beginning to freak out. I asked if anyone else was moving this because I wasn't about to be duped. My brother and Brittany both shook their heads no. Soon enough, my sister-in-law's voice became firm, and she said only benevolent entities were welcome to communicate with us. Violent entities were not welcome. We waited a few more minutes before continuing our session, at which point it was asked again if there were any entities willing to communicate with us. This time, the planchette slowly moved to yes. Deciding to continue, we soon asked if there was anyone in particular the spirit wished to address. The planchette moved to yes again. At this point, it began moving on its own free will. Brittany soon asked who it would like to communicate with specifically. The planchette spelled out Ashley. At this point, Ashley begins freaking out and asking why the hell it wants to communicate with her. Brittany reassured Ashley it was okay and told her to ask the question. She said maybe ask something only a relative might know, in case that it was a relative, and to be sure it wasn't a demon lying about being such. Ashley proceeded to ask what year the entity died. The entity spelled out the date of Ashley's mother's death. This made Ashley frantic, but she was also intrigued. Brittany asked Ashley to ask the board questions only her mother would know. Ashley asked these questions, and when it became apparent she might be speaking with her mother, she let her hand off the planchette to see if it moved without her. It stopped. Eventually, she put 2 fingers on the planchette while we let our hands off of it. The spirit began spelling out how thankful it was Ashley found her sister-in-law, and how her mother never left her. It was really sweet things like that. We spent the next few hours letting Ashley communicate with her mother before she felt ready to end it. We asked if there were any other friendly spirits around that wished to communicate, at which point this was a yes or no answer. When asked why, we were informed there were evil spirits and good spirits, but the good kept the evil away, so in theory anyway. At this point, we thanked Ashley's mother for her protection and asked if she would communicate with the others on our behalf. The planchette moved to yes. We soon took turns asking questions. When it came to my brother's turn, he asked the stupid question of when he would die. At this point, it gave him an old age, and he said it was lame. Finally, it was my turn, but I couldn't think of anything to ask initially. I soon settled on asking if my grandpa was okay and in heaven. The planchette spelled yes and also spelled out that he was proud. I then asked if I have a great year of football, as I had been offered scholarships to Ole Miss and the Miami Hurricanes. The answer was yes. Next, I asked what offer I should take. It spelled Miss. I was excited because Ole Miss was the place I wanted to go. Then, I also thought these answers were a bit convenient and easy, so then I thought that maybe it could just be us playing with ourselves. I asked if I'd make it to Ole Miss. The board answered no. I then asked why. It slowly spelled out that I would have an accident. I then asked what accident. Was I going to get hurt? It said yes. Everyone was getting nervous, but I was, for some reason, getting pissed off. This was when Brittany reminded me I was asking questions I shouldn't be asking. Angry, and already having come this far, I asked her specifics about the accident, like the end result. This is when it spelt out car and death. Having had enough of my brother's and I's questions, Brittany ended the questions. Now that you know the session, I will explain the rest of my story. A year and a half later, my junior year, I got a job delivering pizzas to help my parents pay bills after football season. One night, a night I only know of because my parents have explained it to me, I have no memory of the events, I got into a really bad car accident. It was 7 or 8 in the morning when I came to, and it was explained to me I was traveling along US 1 with a bit of traffic following when I slammed into one of the 2 cars parked on the median. I was going 75 miles per hour and don't wear seatbelts, so I bounced around and planted my face through the windshield, while also making enough of an impact to be knocked off into a nearby river. I got a grade 3 concussion and a contusion on my forehead the size of a cantaloupe. I also tore my meniscus and broke my leg. I then spent the next 2 weeks in the ICU and didn't finish school that year. The doctors were worried I'd hit my head with the result of the easy death, so I was wheelchair bound for a while and at home for a few months. I lost my scholarships, and to this day I am left wondering if I hadn't asked those questions of the Ouija board, would this have even happened? I'll never know for sure. But trust me when I say this. Don't take such things lightly, and always be careful what you ask. It could easily end up taking everything you have.
I have a crippling fear of the dark. The reason as to why I do was because I naturally saw ghosts and I had them touch and interact with me throughout my entire life. It's not really a big deal once you learn to block them, but it sure can be scary when you feel someone lay by your side on the bed, the mattress sink in, and the horror movie cliche of no one being there when you turn around. This story, however, is not about anyone in my bed. When I was in the 8th grade, here in Brazil, we have a popular game which is very similar to the Ouija board. It's called the cup game. Basically, you lay a cup with its opening down on a piece of paper. You write down the alphabet in any order you prefer, and yes and no on each side of the cup. Everyone involved puts their finger on the top of the cup, and you can guess what follows. Apparently, a group of kids from 5th year decided to play the cup game inside the drama club in our school. Mind you, that place is full of mirrors. Eventually, someone in that group called over me and my friends, because one of the girls there apparently began shaking, and she couldn't stop crying. One dire mistake was made that day. Because the girl panicked, they never ended the game. As soon as I stepped into the room, I felt my heart sink down to my core. It was a wrenching feeling, deep with sadness. I felt a bitter taste on my mouth, and had to leave the room as fast as I could. It was horrifying, and I was always a tad scared of ghosts and the paranormal. Things began going downhill from there. One of our friends, let's call her A, was possessed on our second day entering the room, and she almost fell down the stairs because she kept mumbling while slamming herself against the railings. I told my mom about it, her being a witch of some sort, who was used to that kind of stuff. She told me to be careful, that I couldn't do much about it, so I let it go. But I began to feel extremely uneasy. It's that feeling of always having someone watching you, no matter where you go. I felt shivers down my spine, and I could feel my hair being played with, my clothes being messed with. It reminded me of what a mom would do. The first time I saw her was through a bathroom mirror. I confess, I went through some hard times, and I was just harming myself with jagged objects. After all of that ghost subject, I just wanted to relieve myself, and so I found my object of choice and went to the bathroom. Though as I laid my eyes on the mirror, I could see this blonde, very pale woman behind me. I jumped back, but then I got a better look at her. She just seemed so sad. She was just standing there, playing with her fingers. She had sunken blue eyes and a white dress. Then I heard her voice, barely a whisper. "Stop." Her voice sounded so sweet. I was shaking, but I put my blade down, and I looked at her through the mirror, and found that her expression had changed to a happier one. She was perhaps satisfied that I wouldn't do it anymore. Whatever she was, she smiled brightly at me, her hands no longer nervous and her posture relaxed. "You're so good," she beamed. My heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" I asked, and she grew quiet. For a few moments she didn't say anything, and then finally, "I'm your mother, of course," she replied, equally confused. "No, you're not," I responded, and she grew angry, before fading away. Sure, it was scary, but I began noticing that she would do small things for me throughout the day. I noticed that something of mine was missing, only to find it later on a more obvious place, somewhere I was sure I'd already checked. A few hours later, she was in no way harming me, but it was very uncomfortable. I often saw her when I was with my friends, and later on came to find out her name was Sarah. It was only when she met me more in dreams that I found out more things about her. We were sipping tea and she said that she never had a chance to see me grow, because she had had a miscarriage. She mentioned the times were hard, she was French, and that her husband had murdered her on their first night together as a married couple. I just felt so sad for her. I lived with two moms for a while, kind of. When I turned 18, she appeared one last time in my dreams. Though this time, for some reason, she looked far older. Sarah mentioned that she was so happy and proud of me. She said that she was so happy and proud of me. And she said that she was sad my mom was abusive in this life, and she mentioned how hard it'd be for her to be without her child. I knew she was ready to find the light, and so, we hugged. She said I had her nose and then laughed before fading. And then I woke up. And that was the last I saw of my other mom. I kind of miss her at times, even more when I see little things appear unexpectedly in my room from when I was a kid.
The following story takes place almost a year ago exactly. I'm a teaching assistant, working for our after-school program at a private school in California. My coworker, who I'll call Em, and I have always believed our workplace to be haunted. I've always been sure of this, but she's at least believed it to be a possibility. Some of the activity witnessed by us in the school have been doors that would open and shut on their own. Sometimes we hear voices and footsteps when there shouldn't be any at all. Toys are often left in strange places after we put them away for the day. And we'd sometimes see things out of the corner of our eyes. If you can name it, it's happened here. Something else that ups the creep factor and doesn't help our situation at all is Em and I are often the last two on campus. And while the incidents stated are unsettling, none of these things have ever happened to anyone else. It's truly disturbing. As stated previously, we have many strange occurrences around our workplace, and this has led to us to believe the place to be haunted. As such, we decided one day to go around with holy water and incense, trying to bless the building and ask any spirits that might haunt the school to leave or move on. Believing this would work, we headed home for the day. The next day, Em and I were working with pre-K, and in the pre-K building there is a loft. Em was sitting at the table in front of the loft when one of our pre-K kids came up and sat in her lap. She had her head on Em's shoulders when she said, "There's a little boy up there." Em looked in the loft and saw no one, and so tried to laugh it off. She thought the girl was maybe trying to play a trick on her, and told the girl, "There's nobody there." The little girl, we'll call her A, sat up and became adamant as someone was in the loft. "He's right there. You can't see him because he's hiding from you." This unnerved Em, at which point she said, "Well, he can come down and play when he is ready." A looked at Em and said okay, before laying her head back down on Em's shoulder. A minute or two goes by when A suddenly shoots up and says, "Don't lock him in there. He doesn't want to be locked in there." Disturbed, Em comes to me and fills me in on her conversation with A. It is then I make a horrifying realization. The previous night, when I went through with holy water, I never put any in the loft. We looked up that night, and were not giving it a second thought. Thinking of what we could do, I remember when we bought a Ouija board last Halloween. I had it in my back of my car unused. Like dumbasses, we decided we'd try to use it now. Em and I knew it would be stupid to try to use the board in the school itself, so we drove down the street to the marina. After settling in, we brought the Ouija board out and began using it. The first thing we asked was if someone was there. The spirit of a young boy named Daniel came through, informing us that along with him, there were 3 spirits in one particular building. A female spirit named Mariah and a bad spirit. While Em believed the board right off, I was rather skeptical. I'd always been able to fear spirits from a young age, and I only felt one spirit in that building. It felt like bad news, but I kept this information to myself. So, Daniel, if that's his real name, tells us that he and Mariah are afraid of the other spirit, and that the other spirit was very angry. He continued on to say that it didn't like that I was trying to get rid of it, and that it wanted to hurt me. Along with this info, Daniel kept giving us the number 5 along with a string of other numbers. Soon after writing down the numbers, we closed the session to figure out what the numbers meant. My first thought was that it could be a phone number, and as it turns out, I was right. 3 of our coworkers have the same numbers that start with the same starting numbers. Seeing this, we asked if something was going to happen to our coworkers. The board said yes. We then asked if something was trying to harm them. The board once again answered yes. We soon closed the session and headed home. When we returned to work the next day, I went up to A and asked about the boy in the loft. I asked if she knew what he looked like or if he had a name. A was hesitant at first, but she eventually said, "His name is Daniel. He has dark hair, dark eyes, and gray skin." I tried to clarify with A, asking her if she meant his skin was pale, to which she said, no. A then got up, grabbed a gray marker, and informed me his skin was gray like the marker. Needless to say, M was freaked out and left the room, at which that point I asked A if there was anyone else that had ever talked about him. She said that there was nobody else. This, in my mind, cemented that M believed and I knew about the pre-K building being haunted. It also meant I was right about the fact that Daniel wasn't who he claimed to be. A few weeks go by, and with work being so busy, Em and I had practically forgotten everything to do with our 3 co-workers' numbers and the Ouija board session. This lasted as long as it took for those co-workers to go on a trip with 2 of their friends. The group of 5 had traveled to the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas, which wound up becoming the worst mass shooting in the U.S. history. Thankfully, they survived. After this happened, Em and I put all the pieces together. The shooting had taken place 5 weeks after our session on the Ouija board. Leading up to the shooting, the activity on the Ouija board had quieted down, and once our co-workers returned, the activity picked up again. This time, the paranormal occurrences had become more frequent and intense. It got to the point where the students were seeing and hearing things all the time. After enough activity, I decided to go through the building again. This time, however, I didn't use a Catholic prayer. Although I was born and raised Catholic, I had a falling out with the religion recently. As I stated previously, I've been able to sense spirits from a very young age. This was something my Catholic mother did not like at all. Feeling ostracized for being different, among other reasons, I found my way to Wicca, and have been a Wiccan ever since. As such, this time, I went through the building burning sage and performing a cleansing ritual instead. During the cleansing, I made a point to close and seal the board, and any door we may have unintentionally left open. To this day, it appears to have worked.
I'm currently 13 years old, and I've been messing with Ouija boards for about a year now. I do this with 2 friends, one of which usually just watches and doesn't actively participate. In the beginning, we were quite cautious and respectful when using the board. As time went on, however, we became less afraid of the board and more careless. Our first experience was in a friend's bedroom around 5 or 6 in the morning. We met a spirit going by the name of Riff. He was about 8 years old, liked video games, and was apparently killed in a manner he didn't wish to share with us. It was a safe and pretty nice starting experience speaking with the spirit. It helped us relax speaking with the spirits, and we felt he seemed like a nice soul. The second spirit we spoke with was very abrupt. The planchette we used, a flower-shaped cookie cutter we found, moved very slowly. We eventually talked to a spirit who claimed to be 0 years old before getting straight to goodbye on the board. That was that. The third spirit we spoke to was quite a bit more talkative, but still a bit strange. We nicknamed her Dinosaur Lady, because when we asked her about her age, she simply replied with AD. Another strange thing was, she seemed to speak in broken English, but we assumed this was because she was from an era from long before. Shortly after, she stopped communicating with us entirely. By the third time we ever used the Ouija board, we started seeing a spirit named Zozo. It was here where we stopped being afraid and started being a lot less cautious in our use of the board itself. We began screwing around, asking dumb questions like, do you like food? What do you like to do? Etc. This spirit humored us a bit before we asked it what its name was, and he spelled out Zozo. After doing this, things started to get a bit weird. My friend, who doesn't usually actively participate in our sessions, she's also the person whose house we did this session in, started experiencing strange things around her home. Doors would randomly open and shut, or slam. You'd hear strange sounds, and just things like that. We still mess around with the board from time to time, but we haven't got as much activity from it. The spirits that connect to us are usually very weak, and Zozo has decided to take over whenever he feels like. It's come to the point where we can tell it's Zozo by the shift in power of the planchette itself. It legitimately feels as though it's going to fly off the board when he takes over. So far, he's identified himself as both Zaza, Zozo, and Mama. But he doesn't really humor us anymore. We aren't really sure much about him, and I don't really have much else to add other than the events in this story took place in the span of about 6 months.
This story did not happen to me, but to a close family member of mine, and is the reason I do not mess with Ouija boards. My family is very religious, so things like Ouija boards are not allowed in our homes, but this obviously isn't the case for our friends. My cousin, let's call her Ella, had a sleepover at her friend's house. We'll call her Mariah. For the most part of the night, everything was normal, just a bunch of young girls watching movies and playing games. But as the night went on, the girls got bored and decided playing with a Ouija board would be fun. Now, this was the first time the girls had ever played with a Ouija board. My cousin had also grown up religious, and she told me that she had a bad feeling that night. Ella said that she figured it was just because her friend's mom had left for work for the night. She didn't want to be labeled as a coward, so she went along with what she thought was just a game. The girls opened the board onto the living room floor, cut off the light, and began. Their session started out as any other you hear about. They asked questions without getting any answers or having someone obviously move the planchette. But soon things began to change. But eventually, they started to get answers. Now, Ella never told me what question they had asked, other than the usual, is there anyone there, and are you a good spirit? But she did tell me that the planchette started moving around the board in big circles. This next part is the reason I have never messed around with the Ouija board myself. Ella and her friends, feeling nervous, were considering ending the session, arguing amongst themselves about who was moving the planchette. This is when, in front of the board where no one was sitting, a ring of fire burnt into the carpet. There was no hesitation. The girls all jumped up and screamed before stomping out the fire. By that time the damage was done. The burn on the carpet was obvious, so the girls decided to pull the sofa, which was against the wall, into the middle of the room to cover up the scorched carpet, not knowing what else to do. The rest of the night was uneventful. The girls decided to watch some TV and try to take their mind off of the experience. In the morning, the excitement continued, though there was nothing paranormal happening. With Mariah's mom returning home to her couch sitting in the middle of the room, she obviously questioned the girls, who quickly buckled and explained everything to her. Mariah's mother, obviously peeved but also partially convinced by the ring-shaped burn on the floor, threw away the board and called each of the girls' parents to come pick them up. I don't know what she said to the other parents, but Mariah's mother did explain the Ouija board situation to my aunt, Ella's mother. My aunt helped to pay for the damage on the carpet, though Mariah's mother didn't ask for it, and said a prayer for Mariah's family when she went to pick up Ella. From then on, Ella was not allowed to stay over at Mariah's house. And Mariah's mother forbid Mariah from playing with Ouija boards ever again. I'm not exactly sure what those girls saw that night, but most of them did start going to our church for a while after this experience. I myself have never used a Ouija board, but this information does make me question myself whenever I think about using one. I'm not sure though. Would playing with a Ouija board just be a bad decision?
This story happened many moons ago when I was around 13 years old or so. It could have even been earlier, I'm not really too sure in the age. We, my sisters and I, were visiting my aunt and uncle in Belfast during the school holidays. My cousins N and her adopted sister D were quite a few years older than me, as was my one sister. One day, my cousin Ann and my older sister decided to visit Dee in her newly rented apartment. I'm not sure where this place was. It was just too long ago to really remember. But it was quite close to my aunt's house. I, of course, begged to be allowed to tag along. While there, Ann and Dee suggested that we try a homemade Ouija board that they had made. We referred to it as Mirror Mirror. They quickly set it up. It was a large round mirror with handwritten alphabet placed around the outer edges of the mirror, as well as the words yes and no. As far as I can remember, there were no prayers for protection, but after explaining what we all had to do, we put our fingers on an upside-down shot glass, which would act as our planchette. N and D started asking questions. We very soon started getting answers to the questions, and then the blame game started. "You're moving it," says N to D. "No, you're moving it," replies D. "No, you are," etc., etc., you know. Then we all burst out laughing. As soon as we started laughing, the shot glass shot straight up into the air, above our heads, and exploded, sending small glass fragments shooting in every possible direction. Needless to say, we all jumped to our feet and ran as if our lives depended on it. I never went back to Dee's apartment ever again. In fact, I never saw her again. A year or two later, Dee married and moved away. I am now 56 years old, and only a few months ago, Dee and I finally reconnected. This experience scared the crap out of me, and I have never again tried to play Mirror Mirror. Even though I am very inquisitive, I just don't know enough to do this safely. I would like to know your thoughts on why this could have happened. Do you think we maybe angered whatever spirits we were talking to? Or do you think maybe something could explain this scientifically? I just don't know. Any thoughts would be appreciated. I was a teenager when this happened, but I can honestly say I remember it like it happened just a few hours ago. My friend, Bailey, and I were staying at her house for the weekend. It just happened to be the weekend that her mother decided to do some spring cleaning and clean out their spare bedroom. As teenagers, Bailey and I, of course, were doing more playing with the things we found than cleaning. Bailey pulled a box out of the closet and held it up, asking her mother what was inside. Her mother quickly snatched the box out of her hands and told her it was a Ouija board that her aunt had brought from home when she lived there. We shrugged it off and went on with our day. Later that night, her dad decided we needed to burn some of the things that had been thrown out. The fire was small and burning normally until her mother threw the Ouija board in it. What happened next is something I can only describe as unexplainable. The flames of the fire turned blue, and the fire flamed out much higher than before. We stood there looking at each other, all a bit shaken, but also glad that it was gone. Eventually, the fire burned down and we all settled in for bed. Bailey and I were in the den watching a movie when we heard it. Something rattling inside one of the boxes that was to go back into storage. Thinking her cat had climbed inside and become stuck, Bailey opened the box and immediately screamed. That could only have been mashed if a man had jumped out of the box with a knife. I ran over to her and peered into the box. I found the Ouija board from earlier, alone in the box. Her parent ran in to find Bailey and I still staring into the box, trying to wrap our minds around what we were seeing. It was the middle of the night, but her dad grabbed the box and threw it outside. He proceeded to spray it with lighter fluid from the nearby grill and light it on fire. The flame was the same strange blue color, and this time, there was an odd noise that came from it, almost like a hissing mixed with a quiet screaming. When the fire had died down, there was nothing but a pile of ash and embers. To my knowledge, the Ouija board has not made another appearance since, but even now, all these years later, I still get the chills thinking about it. Ouija boards are nothing to play with, and knowing what I know now, it terrifies me to think that some people play with them as if they are a toy. Be careful with them. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I played the Ouija board with my friends at least 7 times. I know this can be dangerous, but I was young and didn't take this stuff all that seriously. We always asked silly questions, but every answer came back true. That said, I always believed my friends were moving the glass. I didn't think much of any of this. Now that I've given you a background on this, I'll tell you the story of when I began to believe in the paranormal. I was chilling in my friends when we decided to give the board a go. We didn't think anything of it because we didn't think it was real at this point, so what harm could it do? This time when we started, I asked my friend to ask something we didn't know yet. My friend agreed as it'd make it impossible to answer something by moving the glass ourselves if we didn't have the answer to the question we asked. We began to think of what to ask when I remembered I didn't really know my mom's and mother's name, as her mom died in her 20s, so it never really came up. As such, we asked what the first letter of my grandmother's name was. The glass then moved to D, then asked for the second letter, at which point it moved to E. I asked for the third letter, but the glass wouldn't move further because of the wax on the board from the candles. I soon removed the wax and asked for the third letter again, at which point it went to R. It was at this point we closed the session and asked ourselves what name started with the letters D, E, R. Curious, we decided to ask the day after in the morning, as I never asked my mom about my grandmother, but eventually, we grew too curious and called my mom up anyway. My mom picked up and I told her we were doing the quiz, but I needed to know her mother's name. She answered that it was Tina. Perplexed, I asked, "Are you sure?" She then said, "Well, that's her nickname. Her actual name is Dernestina." My friend and I were shocked. I took the glass outside and shattered it, as I heard if you had a bad ghost, you could do this to rid yourself of it, and I didn't want to take any chances that the ghost speaking with us was bad. The next day I spoke with my mom about everything and she chewed me out something serious. I've never messed with the Ouija board since.
It was the summer, and I was 15. My friends and I hung out a lot that summer, and my friend Sarah wanted us to spend the night at her house the last weekend before school started, so we did the usual sleepover things young teens do. Then she brought it out. The Ouija board. Now, my grandmother had always told me not to mess around with those, but Sarah and my other friends talked me into it. Of course, we did the whole candles and darkened room bit. We started messing around, giggling, and trying to blame the movement on someone else. Then it got weird. The planchette suddenly seemed to get cooler under our fingers. The giggling started to die down to nervous laughter between us. All of a sudden, the planchette started to spell out 2 words. My house. It did this a few times, then all of a sudden a gust of wind blew out the candles, which was extremely weird because there were no windows open. Well, we got out of that room as fast as we could. We tried to laugh it off and tried to come up with explanations to what we just saw. We ended up staying all night in the living room. We left her house as soon as we could. Well, this is when it got even weirder. School started back up, and we sort of forgot about that night, except we started to notice Sarah was absent a lot. And when she was in school, she didn't look well. She had dark rings around her eyes, and she looked sick. So we decided to go visit her one day after school when again she had not been there that day. Her mom lets us in the house and takes us to the family room. Sarah looked terrible. She was quiet and just stared off into space. We didn't really know what to do, so we just told her we hoped she felt better and then turned to go. Her mom asked us to wait around a moment, and she came outside with us. She asked us if we knew what Sarah did to her room. We had no clue what she was talking about. She said that after that weekend we slept over, Sarah began to change. She wouldn't sleep, and her room began to smell. This horrible, rotting smell. They had cleaned her room and cleaned the rugs. We said we didn't know of anything, and we left in a hurry. We saw less and less of Sarah, and finally she just stopped coming at all. We would go and try to see her, but her mom said that she wasn't up to seeing anyone. Her mom looked exhausted, and soon after that we stopped trying to see her at all. Later in the year my family moved away. I lost contact with my friends. After college I moved back into town. I reconnected with a few girls from back then. Somehow we got on the subject of Ouija boards, and then I asked what had ever happened to Sarah. They filled me in. Sarah's parents had hired a pest control guy to see if something had died in the wall or under the house, because the smell in Sarah's room was still there and seemed to be getting stronger. He didn't find anything, so her parents replaced all the sheetrock and the rug in her room. And still, the smell did not go away. By this time, Sarah's parents had put her in the mental hospital because all she would ever mutter was, "My house, my house." Sarah's parents eventually moved out and tried to sell the place. My friend said it sat empty for a very long time, and one night it caught fire and burned down. So if you're ever at a sleepover and someone tries to get you with a Ouija board, you better think twice about it. I am 17 years old now. I have lived in the same house for 11 years. When we first moved in, we of course had some creepy things happen. We heard noises in the attic, like talking. We checked out the noises ourselves just in case we had mice, or like those weird people that move into your house and live in your attic when you don't know. Those creepers that only come out when you're not there or you're sleeping to get some of your food. But we never found anything. Occasionally we would hear footsteps and stomping upstairs, doors closing and opening even though some doors would be locked, only to be found unlocked and open. Nothing ever really scared me until my brother got into playing with Ouija boards inside the house with his friends. I was never into them, they always creeped me out. But after they began their bouts with the Ouija board, things got stranger. My first sighting was when I was sitting in my hallway, a week after my brother started messing around with the Ouija. I saw a girl standing in his bathroom, facing away from me. I was scared and I was alone upstairs. I can even remember the details in the white nightgown she wore. It scared the hell out of me. I was only 8 at the time. I ran downstairs, terrified. Of course, no one believed me when I told them. About a few weeks later, this all happened during the summer. I was in my room and about to go to bed. I usually sleep on my back. I also knew I was awake when this happened because I was still able to move. But one night, I saw this figure hovering over me. It was running its fingers into my hair. I could even feel my hair move around and the faint breeze going through it. This happened for about 2 weeks, then suddenly stopped. I kinda got used to it happening, and whatever it was didn't scare me anymore. It wasn't until one night I was laying in my bed with the covers off. I live in the desert, so it was hot as hell, and the blankets flew over me and I felt pressure on my nose and mouth. I couldn't breathe and I was fighting and kicking for about a minute, until I finally got the covers off of me and I screamed my brother's name thinking it was him. But there was no one there. Nothing. No one in my room. I looked around upstairs as well, but there was no one. The only person who was home with me was my mother, and she was downstairs watching TV. And why would my mother play a prank on me like that? Let's just say I didn't get any sleep that night, or that week. It's been about 9 years since this all happened. I can still hear those footsteps around my house when I'm home alone, or the occasional doors opening and closing, even after they've been locked. But I have never been so scared like that summer. I hope I never have contact with them again. Maybe next time they'll actually suffocate me. I just can't wait to get the hell out of this house. And until then, I hope my brother and his friends stop messing with the Ouija board.